Okay, picture this. It is January 27th, 2026. And if you've been scrolling through your news feed in the last 48 hours, you've probably felt that knot in your stomach.
Hmm.
The United States and Canada, I mean, historically best friends, right? Neighbors. The longest undefended border in the world. And they look like they're standing on the edge of a cliff.
Oh, absolutely.
We've got threats of, nuclear option tariffs, accusations of betrayal. The entire North American economy is just hanging in the balance.
It feels less like diplomacy and more like we're watching a really high-stakes poker game.
Yeah.
But, the players aren't at a felt table in Vegas.
Yeah.
One is in the Oval Office, the other is in Ottawa, and the chips. The chips are literally the price of your groceries in your car.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and this is why we're doing this deep dive today. If you just look at the press conferences, the angry tweets, the cable news chyrons, you're only seeing the surface. You're seeing the noise.
Yeah.
We've got our hands on a confidential strategic assessment update memo. It was circulated this morning. And it argues that what we're watching isn't just a messy trade dispute. It is a textbook, almost masterclass application of advanced game theory.
Specifically, the memo calls it a game of Bayesian poker.
Bayesian poker. Okay, I love that term, but we need to unpack what that actually means for you listening. Because, usually when we talk about trade wars, we're talking about basis points and supply chains. But this memo suggests that a series of very specific, very subtle moves over the last 2 days has completely shifted the odds of where this is all going.
Right. The memo uses a lot of, technical language terms like costly signaling, separating equilibrium, and Nash bargaining. But our mission today is to translate that
Into plain English.
into plain English. Because once you see the math behind the politics, the chaotic events of yesterday look completely different. It stops looking like a mess, and it starts looking like a strategy.
So let's set the board. For anyone who hasn't been glued to the financial news, Canada recently decided to go rogue, at least from the U.S. perspective, and finalized a trade deal with China.
Right. They reduced tariffs on about 49,000 electric vehicles and lowered barriers for canola exports. In the current geopolitical climate with the U.S. trying to freeze China out, that is a massive provocation.
And the response was immediate.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, threatened a blanket 100% tariff on all Canadian goods, the nuclear option.
Total panic. Panic in the markets, panic in Ottawa.
Everyone just assumed the economy was about to crash. But then we get to yesterday, January 26th, and this is where the memo starts its analysis. We saw two completely contradictory things happen at the exact same time.
This is the phase the strategists call information warfare.
Let's start with a public spectacle. You had U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Fox News, and he didn't just criticize Canada. He effectively declared victory. He claimed that Mark Carney, the key Canadian official, had, and I'm quoting here, aggressively walked back his defiant remarks from Davos.
It was a very specific performance. Bessent painted this picture of just total Canadian capitulation.
Yeah.
He told the world that Carney admitted Canada depends on the U.S., and he even took a swipe at Carney's, globalist agenda.
Right. So if you're watching that at home, the message was clear. The U.S. applied pressure, Canada panicked, and Canada folded. Game over.
America won. But here's the fascinating part from the strategic assessment. That was a lie. And I don't mean a slight exaggeration or a political spin.
You mean just a fabrication?
The memo is categorical. It was a calculated piece of information warfare. The U.S. administration knew, privately, that Canada hadn't folded.
See, this is what I struggle with. If you know the other guy is still fighting, why tell everyone he surrendered? Doesn't that just make you look bad when the truth comes out? Like, aren't you setting yourself up for a fact check?
In normal life, yes. But in game theory, credibility is a weapon. The goal was to destroy Carney's credibility before he could even start negotiating. I mean, think about the rest of the world, the UK, Australia, Japan, other middle powers. If they believe Canada caved the second Trump threatened them, it signals that resistance is futile.
So it's about isolating Canada.
Exactly. It creates what they call a fait accompli. It tells the world, look, even the Canadians couldn't stand up to us. Don't you dare try it. It undermines Carney's ability to build a coalition. I mean, who wants to ally with a guy who apparently surrenders?
But there was an even wilder detail in the sources about this media blitz. And this one, I mean, I had to read it twice, the Alberta angle.
Oh, this is significant. This is where the game almost went off the rails.
So you have Secretary Bessent and a Congressman, Andy Ogles, openly musing about Alberta, Canadian province joining the United States.
Bessent called Alberta a natural partner, and referenced the Stay Free Alberta petition.
Which, according to the memo, is a real thing, but let's be clear on the scale here. It needs something like, what, 177,000 signatures by May to even be relevant? It's a fringe movement.
A total fringe movement, but suddenly you have top U.S. officials on national television saying, hey, maybe we should just let them join the U.S.
From a game theory perspective, what is that? What's the move there?
That's what we call escalation dominance. You threaten something so extreme that the other side becomes terrified to make even a small move.
It feels like bringing a bazooka to a knife fight.
Ideally, yes. But the memo argues this was a huge tactical error. It crossed a red line. There's a massive difference between saying, I'm going to tax your cars and
I might absorb your territory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One is trade policy. The other is threatening the map. When you question a neighbor's territorial integrity, you are not negotiating economics anymore. You're threatening their existence. The memo points out that while this was meant to destabilize Canadian politics, make Carney deal with separatists at home, it risked a massive, massive backfire.
Because nothing unites a country like a neighbor eyeing their backyard.
Precisely. It turns a trade dispute into a question of national survival.
Okay, so that's the noise. That's what was on TV. Fire and fury, Canada surrendered, and we're taking Alberta. But while Besson is on Fox saying this, something completely different is happening on the secure phone lines. Trump called Carney.
And this is a crucial data point for our Bayesian analysis. Trump initiated the call.
Why does that matter? Who dialed?
In negotiations at this level, everything is a signal. Everything. If you are the one reaching out, you are signaling a desire to manage the outcome.
You want a deal.
You want something. If Trump was truly in destroy mode, what game theorists call a pure high-resolve type he wouldn't call, he'd just sign the executive order and go play golf.
The memo says the call lasted 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a you're fired call.
No, that's a real conversation, a substantive discussion. They talked Ukraine, Venezuela, Arctic security, the USMCA review, and crucially, Carney told Trump directly, I meant what I said in Davos.
He didn't walk anything back.
Stood his ground. And Trump's reaction.
He was impressed.
He was reportedly impressed.
This is the disconnect that's so wild. On TV, his Treasury Secretary is saying, Canada caved. But on the phone, Trump is saying, I'm impressed you stood your ground.
That's the duality of the strategy. But here's the mystery that the memo really dives into, the delayed correction.
Yes, this is the part that confused everyone yesterday. Besson lies on TV on January 26th, and Ottawa just goes silent for 16, maybe 20 hours. No press release, no angry tweet, nothing.
And the domestic critics in Canada went absolutely nuts.
Oh, I saw the headlines. Incompetence. Why aren't you defending yourself? You're letting the U.S. define the narrative. It looked like they were asleep at the wheel.
It certainly looked that way. But our source says this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a communications failure. It was a sophisticated move. And this is where we get to the core concept. Costly signaling.
Break that down for us. How is staying silent and letting people trash you a costly signal?
Okay, so in game theory, talk is cheap. Anyone can say I'm tough. Anyone can tweet I didn't cave. That costs you nothing.
Right.
To prove you're tough, you have to do something that actually costs you something. You have to incur a loss to prove your resolve.
And in this case, the cost was the political damage at home.
Exactly. By waiting 20 hours, Carney allowed that narrative he caved to spread. He let the opposition parties attack him. He let the media question his backbone. That is a real political cost. He took damage.
Why would you want to take damage? It seems so counterintuitive.
To prove you can afford it.
Oh.
Think about it. If Carney was actually weak, what the memo calls a low autonomy type, he'd be terrified of looking weak. He would have rushed to the microphone 5 minutes after Besson spoke to scream, no, I didn't. I'm tough.
Because he couldn't afford to look like he was losing control.
Exactly. The panic to prove you're tough actually signals insecurity. But a high autonomy leader, someone who knows they're secure and isn't bluffing, they can sit back. They can say, go ahead. Lie about me. I'll correct it tomorrow. The silence showed confidence.
It's like the guy in the bar who doesn't flinch when the other guy gets in his face.
Yeah.
The guy who screams back is usually the scared one.
That's a perfect analogy. The silence was the signal. It separated the bluffers from the real deal. The memo calls this a separating equilibrium.
A separating equilibrium.
When the U.S. looked at that 20-hour silence and their calculation changed, they realized, okay, he's willing to take a domestic beating to stick to his guns. He is not bluffing about diversifying away from us.
And that's where the information warfare just completely backfired.
It did. The memo notes a domestic political rally effect. Even the conservative opposition in Canada, who would usually love to see the government fail, had to defend Carney because the U.S. dishonesty was so blatant.
Well, yeah, and then you add the Alberta comments on top of that.
Right.
You can't really side with a foreign power that is openly musing about taking over one of your provinces. That's political suicide.
Exactly. You don't lie about a private call, and you don't question sovereignty. Those are the unwritten rules. So instead of dividing Canada, Besant accidentally united them.
Which strengthened Carney's hand even further.
Significantly.
Okay, so we've had the bluff, the call, the lie, and the silence. Where does that leave us right now? The memo talks about updated Bayesian priors.
Yeah.
Which is a fancy way of saying what we think is going to happen now.
Right. So before this weekend, the probability of the U.S. just crushing Canada with coercion was high, about 35%. The model assumed Canada would fold.
And now?
That's dropped to 25%. The silence and the backfire, they changed the variables. The most likely outcome now, sitting at 45%, is what the memo calls strategic accommodation.
Strategic accommodation. That sounds like a polite way of saying a tie.
It is a classic Nash bargaining outcome. Basically, both sides realize the other isn't going to fold, and a total war would hurt everyone way too much.
So what does that deal actually look like? Because Trump can't just walk away with nothing, can he? He promised 100% tariffs. He needs a win.
And he won't get 100%. But the prediction is that by July 1st, 2026, we will see a compromise. Canada gets to keep its China deal, but it has to be narrow.
What does narrow mean?
They have to be super transparent about those EVs. Make sure China isn't using Canada as a backdoor to flood the U.S. market.
Okay, so Canada keeps its autonomy in the deal. What does the U.S. get out of it?
The U.S. gets to slap on some tariffs, maybe 25 to 40% on specific high-risk sectors. Electronics, maybe some specific car parts.
So Trump gets to go on TV and say, I taxed them, I protected American industry, I won.
While Carney gets to go on TV and say, we didn't cancel our deal, we maintained our sovereignty, we won.
So everyone claims victory.
That is usually how these high-stakes games end, if the players are rational.
If is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
It is. The memo still leaves a 20% chance of mutual escalation. That's the scenario where things go wrong, egos get in the way, or domestic politics forces a fight no one actually wants.
I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea of a middle power agency. Because usually when a superpower like the U.S. goes up against a smaller country like Canada, we just assume the superpower wins. It's like gravity.
That's the traditional view, right? Thucydides. The strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must. But what we're seeing here and what this memo highlights is that in a networked modern world, smaller players have more moves than we think.
Like what? How do you fight a giant?
Well, you use their own aggression against them. By standing firm, Canada signals to Europe, to Japan, to the UK that the US is being unreasonable. It builds a quiet coalition. It's almost like a judo move. You use the giant's own weight to throw them off balance.
And the memo mentions Canada is planning, 12 new trade deals across 4 continents in the next 6 months.
That's the diversification strategy.
Right.
It is basically Canada saying, we can't rely on you anymore. You're too volatile, so we're going to make friends with everyone else.
Which is so ironic because the whole reason for the threats was to stop Canada from drifting away. But by threatening them, they're just accelerating the drift.
That is the paradox of coercion. Sometimes the harder you squeeze, the more sand slips through your fingers. Trump's threat was meant to force loyalty, but it actually incentivized Canada to run faster toward other markets.
So let's look at the calendar. The memo mentions a forcing function. July 1st, 2026.
That's the deadline for the USMCA review. That's the ticking clock. We have about 5 months.
5 months to see if this mathematical model holds up against the chaos of real-world politics.
The model suggests a deal, but models assume rational actors. And as we saw with the Alberta comments or the Besant interview, people aren't always rational.
And that Alberta thing really sticks with me. Because you can negotiate tariffs on steel. You can negotiate the price of a Tesla. Can you negotiate when someone questions your country's right to exist?
That is the wild card. If the U.S. keeps pushing that button, the maybe we should just annex Alberta button, then all the game theory goes out the window. Because for Canada, it's not about trade anymore.
It's about survival.
It's about survival. And they will accept massive economic pain to maintain their borders.
It really is a fascinating moment. We went from a near guarantee of a trade war to a likely compromise. all because one guy decided to stay silent for 20 hours.
It shows the power of the non-move. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is say nothing at all.
So here's the question I want to leave you with today. We're looking at this through the lens of a trade deal. But if this strategy works, if Canada successfully stares down the U.S. and keeps its China deal, what does that tell the rest of the world? Are we watching the end of an era where the U.S. can just dictate economic policy to its allies? Or is it just a one-off?
That is the bigger picture. If this works, every middle power is going to be studying the Carney playbook. We might be seeing a fundamental shift in how global diplomacy works.
We will be watching that July 1st deadline very, very closely. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.